A moderate earthquake just shook 9 countries at once, and the ground it came from was declared dead 5 million years ago. Just after 3 in the morning, Egypt's Gulf of Suez ruptured, and the shaking didn't stay local. It crossed borders into Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, even Cyprus, 400 kilometers from where it started. Officially, no one was hurt. Unofficially, seismologists are quietly staring at something stranger than the shaking itself. 9 months before this quake hit, a study reclassified this fault as something scientists had insisted for decades it could no longer be: active. It started just after 3 in the morning on August 3rd, in the dark, when almost no one is braced for anything. In Cairo, windows rattled, furniture shifted, people ran into the streets in their pajamas, phones out, not sure yet what had woken them. One content creator caught it live, mid-broadcast, the frame suddenly shaking around him. That clip is now the closest thing to a black box this event has. The epicenter sat roughly 40 kilometers north of the city of Suez, out toward the gulf that splits the Sinai Peninsula from mainland Egypt, 10 kilometers down. That depth matters more than it sounds like it should. A shallow earthquake doesn't lose as much energy pushing up through rock before it reaches the surface. The shaking comes out closer to full strength. That's the first reason this one felt disproportionate to its size. And its size, on paper, wasn't enormous. This was not a monster by the numbers. It was a moderate earthquake, the kind that occurs somewhere on Earth almost every day. What wasn't ordinary was how far it traveled. Tremors reached El Arish near the Gaza border. They reached Beersheba and the outskirts of Jerusalem. They rattled buildings in Amman, in Damascus, in Baghdad, along the Saudi coast, even as far as Cyprus, out over open water. 9 countries felt a quake that, by magnitude alone, should have stayed a regional story. Egypt's health ministry didn't treat it like a minor event. Emergency response plans were activated within minutes. Ambulance crews were put on what officials called maximum levels of preparedness. The Egyptian Red Crescent issued a public warning urging people to stay clear of older, weaker buildings, especially in Cairo's working-class neighborhoods, where construction from decades past hasn't always aged well. Here's the first thing that doesn't quite add up. No deaths, no confirmed injuries, no reported structural damage. That was the official word from the health ministry and the Red Crescent, hours after crews had already mobilized as if for something worse. A country doesn't put ambulances on standby and warn people away from buildings for nothing. And yet the aftermath, at least so far, has been almost eerily quiet. The obvious explanation was simple. Egypt sits near active fault systems. This happens. It was just a strong one. That's not wrong exactly. The Gulf of Suez has documented seismic activity, and Egyptian geophysicists have said publicly, this is a region known for active faults. But here's the crack in that tidy explanation. Ask 4 different seismic agencies what actually happened, and you get 4 different answers. The U.S. Geological Survey clocked it at magnitude 5.0. The European Mediterranean Seismological Center put it near 5.2. Germany's GFZ measured 5.4. Egypt's own National Research Institute of Astronomy and Geophysics started at 5.2, then revised upward. Some statements citing 5.5, others 5.6. That's not a rounding error. That's a spread wide enough to change how a public understands the danger it just lived through. And underneath that disagreement sits something almost nobody was talking about in the first hours. This fault had just been formally declared in the scientific literature no longer dead. Start with the easy explanation for why the shaking traveled so far. Shallow quakes shake harder at the surface. Confirmed, true, and it's part of the story. But depth alone doesn't explain a tremor reaching 9 countries and 400 kilometers. Something else had to be amplifying it. That something is the ground itself. Beneath Cairo, beneath the Suez Canal zone, sits soft alluvial sediment, the kind of loose, water-saturated soil built up over millennia by the Nile Delta and low-lying coastal plains. Seismic waves slow down when they hit soft material like that, and when they slow down, they don't lose energy, they stack it, growing taller and stronger at the surface. It's the same physical process that made a moderate quake feel, to people standing in it, like something much bigger. Shallow depth plus soft ground. That's the mechanism behind the reach. It is not the mechanism behind the disagreement over magnitude, and those are two separate mysteries. The magnitude gap has a duller explanation, but an important one. In the first hours after any earthquake, agencies are working from incomplete data. Different networks, different calibration windows, different measurement scales, moment magnitude versus body wave magnitude, global stations versus regional ones. Numbers get revised as more seismic waveforms arrive. That's normal science, not concealment. But normal science moving in public, in real time, in the middle of a frightened news cycle, looks a lot like confusion. That gap between technical process and public perception is where a lot of exaggerated headlines are born. Not because anyone lied, because revision looks like disagreement to a viewer who doesn't know why the number moved. Here's where it gets genuinely strange. For decades, the Gulf of Suez has been described in geological literature as a failed rift. Around 20 to 30 million years ago, as the Arabian Plate began pulling away from Africa, opening the Red Sea, the Gulf of Suez was one of the arms of that stretching. Then, roughly 5 million years ago, by the old consensus, it stopped. The rifting stalled. Extension moved east toward what's now the Gulf of Aqaba and the Dead Sea Transform Fault. The Gulf of Suez was left behind, structurally, as a scar. Quiet, post-rift, essentially finished. That consensus didn't survive 2025. A study published in November of that year in the journal Geophysical Research Letters re-examined the fault system beneath the Suez Canal and concluded it wasn't finished at all. It was still accumulating strain, still tectonically live. That paper upended decades of textbook framing, and this August 3rd earthquake is the first significant seismic event to occur on that system since 9 months. That's the gap between a scientific reclassification most of the public never heard about and a quake that just woke up millions of people across the Middle East. The head of NRIAG's earthquake department, Sharif El-Hadi, confirmed publicly what the new research had already suggested. The Gulf of Suez remains an active, seismically capable region, part of the same giant rift system that opened the Red Sea, and its faults, in his words, remain active today. That's not speculation. That's the institution that measured the quake, describing the exact structure the quake ruptured. But even here, the sources don't fully agree. Egyptian officials reported 5 aftershocks following the main shock, a normal, expected pattern. An independent seismic tracking service monitoring the same 100-kilometer radius logged essentially none. Both can't be fully right, and the likely explanation is duller than a cover-up. Different networks have different sensitivity thresholds. Smaller aftershocks that one system catches, another simply doesn't register. It's not evidence of manipulation. It is evidence that even now, in an era of global seismic monitoring, we don't have one single unified picture of what a reactivated fault is actually doing beneath our feet in real time. A geologist quoted in Egyptian press, Nabawi, described the aftershock sequence as a natural stress release process, the crust settling after the main rupture. But he added a caveat worth sitting with. Aftershocks don't fully drain the energy stored along a fault, they reduce it. They don't eliminate the possibility of further movement. Their frequency typically declines over days, but typically is not the same as guaranteed. And here's a number worth understanding correctly, because it gets abused constantly online. Historically, only a small minority, roughly 6%, of moderate earthquakes turn out to be foreshocks of something larger. That means the overwhelming majority don't. Low probability is not zero probability, and that distinction is exactly why officials stayed cautious without declaring anything close to inevitable. This is not a countdown, it's a data point. So here's where the investigation actually stands by the end of the immediate aftermath. A moderate quake, unusually far-reaching, struck the first time since scientists quietly reversed their understanding of the fault underneath it. That's the strongest thread in this story. And it's the one that pulls the narrative somewhere much bigger than a single morning in Suez. To understand what this quake actually means, you have to go back to October 1992. That's the earthquake most Egyptians measure every other tremor against. It struck near Dashur, southwest of Cairo, magnitude 5.8, barely larger than what just happened. It killed more than 500 people and displaced thousands. It remains, to this day, the deadliest earthquake in modern Egyptian history. Let that land for a second. A quake in the same magnitude class as the one that just shook 9 countries once killed hundreds of people in the same country. That comparison is real, and it should make you uneasy. But the comparison is not a forecast, and here's exactly why. What made 1992 catastrophic wasn't primarily its magnitude. It was where and when it happened. Dashur sits close to dense Cairo neighborhoods, and the quake struck in the afternoon when streets, schools, and buildings were full of people, many of them inside older structures never built to modern seismic codes. This August's quake struck at 3 in the morning, farther out toward the Gulf, away from Cairo's most vulnerable, densely packed districts. Same rough magnitude class, radically different outcome, not because one earthquake was gentler than the other, because timing, distance, population density, and building construction did the actual killing in 1992, not the number on the Richter scale. That's the uncomfortable lesson buried in this comparison. Magnitude tells you how much energy was released. It does not tell you who lives or dies. Depth, distance, soil, construction quality, and the hour on the clock decide that. Egypt got, in some sense, a warning shot with a very different ending this time, off the same broader tectonic system that once produced a mass casualty event. That is not the same as saying it will happen again. It's saying the ingredients for consequence, not the earthquake itself, are what actually matter. There was also a temptation in the hours after to connect this quake to other recent regional disruptions, to treat it as part of some larger unfolding pattern. It isn't. There is no shared fault system, no shared mechanism, linking this quake to unrelated seismic or geopolitical events happening elsewhere in the region at the same time. When the data doesn't support a connection, the honest answer is coincidence, not conspiracy. That correction matters because in the first news cycle, a lot of speculative connections spread faster than the geology ever could. What's left, once you strip away the false connections and the panic-driven headlines, is one real unresolved variable. How much stress is actually still stored in a rift system that modern instruments only recently confirmed is alive again, running directly beneath one of the most strategically critical waterways on Earth? So here's where things actually stand. Confirmed. A shallow, moderate earthquake struck the Gulf of Suez on August 3rd, felt across 9 countries, with no deaths or major damage reported. Confirmed. The fault beneath it was reclassified as tectonically active less than a year earlier, ending a decades-old assumption that it had gone quiet for good. Interpreted, not confirmed. Shallow depth combined with soft delta sediment explains why the shaking traveled so far. Unresolved, the true current aftershock count and how much accumulated strain remains along this reactivated system. What would change this picture is specific. Sustained aftershock clustering, measurable ground deformation detected by GPS or satellite radar along the rift. Those are the signals seismologists are actually watching now, not because disasters expected, but because a fault that surprised science once already deserves to be watched closely. The title's premise doesn't survive contact with the evidence, not the way it was framed. This wasn't a monster by magnitude. It was something quieter and, in its way, more unsettling. A rift the textbooks called finished, speaking again for the first time since anyone thought to check. Right now, instruments sit along the Gulf of Suez, logging a structure once written off as dead, while cargo ships and tankers keep crossing the canal just a few kilometers above it, entirely unaware they're floating over a question nobody can fully answer yet. If you felt this one, wherever you were, it's worth asking what you noticed, and whether you'd ever heard that the ground beneath that canal wasn't as finished as everyone assumed.